Hello and welcome to another episode of You, Me, and Ennui. Today, we'll be welcoming our guest, Pascal Hensel, to talk with us about the value of networking and creating community within or outside of work. So before we say hello to him, I'll introduce you with a brief bio. Pascal Hensel is a Virginia native who is passionate about encouraging Christ-centered living, connecting people, and spreading Jesus's influence in the world and its many corners. Pascal is Young Catholic Professionals Chief of Staff and also serves as the president of the YCP Washington, D.C. chapter. Prior to joining YCP, Pascal was a senior consultant at Deloitte, where he worked in program management, operations, and technology strategy. He has also worked in a variety of roles across public policy and international relations, think tanks, and government agencies, having earned a BA in Foreign Affairs and Middle East Studies from the University of Virginia. When he's not working on Catholic networking, Pascal spends his time praying, reading, exercising, socializing with friends, and making music. Welcome, Pascal. So good to have you.
Thanks so much for having me.
As I was reading your bio, it's really cool to see the various ways that you make use of your time. And a lot of it sounds very social, which I feel is very on brand with the topic today on the value of networking and creating community. It sounds like it's something that really just comes naturally to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, community is just part of who we are as people. So, there's all sorts of different ways to engage in all sorts of different parts of life. So, yeah, it's good to integrate all of it.
That's great. Yeah, I can totally relate. I have a cousin who jokes, she's like, only you could make friends with people at your gym. And like it's so true to me. I love networking and socializing in any opportunity. So I'm very much a social creature, so I can totally relate. But enough about me. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your career and what you've learned over time about creating community in your professional life?
Yeah, sure. So, as was explained in my bio, I studied at the University of Virginia. I studied international affairs there and then moved back to the DC area where I grew up and then did some very typical Washington, DC jobs. I was in think tanks for a little bit and then pivoted over to Air Force International Affairs at the Pentagon. This was a really neat job and afforded some really fun opportunities, to be honest. But I did also recognize that I just wasn't passionate enough about the subject matter and also risk getting pigeonholed into that field, which was something that I wanted to avoid. So I began a new job at Deloitte in consulting to really expand my horizons. And I learned so much about networking there, as I'm sure many others working in consulting firms will share. But yeah, I worked there for about 3 years and then left to join Young Catholic Professionals, where I've been for a little over a year and a half and currently serve as chief of staff. In terms of community, I think it's just simply one of the most important things. As professionals, especially if we're ambitious, it's perhaps easy to ignore it as something that, doesn't weigh particularly into perhaps our immediate goals
Mm.
for wealth, stability, professional development, et cetera, unless we're talking specifically about professional networking, which we'll get to. But otherwise the human element though is still so important and, central to our flourishing as human beings. So I think, especially if we think interiorly to what we seek in relationships and what makes us happy with, friends, coworkers, and then the emotions that are tied to that, we seek, and this isn't comprehensive, but we seek companionship, right? So a closeness and desire to share in life, and share experiences with other people. We also seek inspiration. We want to be able to look up to our friends for certain things, rather than, maybe feel continuously at worst superior to them, or perhaps disappointed. And then also direction. So, we want people to draw the best out of us and contribute to our journey forward. And so if relationships lack these things, if they lack intentionality and purpose in a sense, they can get stale. And those are situations where, you might have a lot of friends, but you might still be really lonely and purposeless on the inside. So, I think many of us have heard all sorts of studies about the rise in loneliness. I mean, some studies show, for example, 60+% of young adults feel serious loneliness, and depression rates are also, high, maybe not as high, but still quite high. And, this plays into our professional life too, because our professional life, consumes so much of our time and is a significant portion of our lives. So it's it needs to be worthwhile and life giving. So yeah, we need good personal friendships to sustain our human flourishing. And we need to remember that professional life is part of our life, right? And that relationships matter there too. And then this also ends up playing into our, this plays into our emotional and mental health, certainly. But then also, in terms of networking too, it, has influences on our professional trajectories and the way we navigate those relationships in our journey forward.
For sure. I mean, I really want to hit on two things that you highlighted. Um, and I hope I can remember both of them, but because I was really enjoying everything you were saying. But the first was that it's really interesting to me that you highlighted that there's like a duality between like there's this innate desire for connection and a desire for, yeah, developing a deeper connection with other people. But I feel like there is on the other side of that coin, um, this hesitancy to like approach other people. Like it can feel kind of like a scary thing to just like make that first step. So like I kind of wanted to highlight that. And then also something that you hit on about, there's the functional part of networking and also the emotional part. And I wonder if maybe, especially within high achieving professional folks, you have a certain set of criteria that you need to hit, but maybe you don't consider like networking or like interpersonal skills as part of like your quote unquote success in work. And I wonder if those are like two things that inhibit people from really making it a priority to network both like personally and professionally.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think there's, at worst, there can be a sense of shame, right? When you come into a new city and you're brand new, where, you might find yourself showing up to something, some function, and not knowing anyone there. And that can be a stressful, embarrassing, maybe even potentially shameful feeling experience. And that can be a difficult thing. And I want to acknowledge it. That's a real true feeling that I think we all have. And I think part of the challenge is overcoming that and realizing that hey, it's going to be okay. It's good to come to this and good to come out of my comfort zone. And then I guess when it comes to professional relationship building and networking, yeah, I mean there's a sense in which it can potentially feel transactional, I suppose.
Mhm.
And so, people might struggle to navigate, like, when you go into a room at some, happy hour or whatever, like, okay, am I supposed to just become friends with everyone here? Well, that's not going to happen. But on the other hand, I don't want to treat people like just some tool or object to use. So why am I here? What do I do? This is awkward. So
Yeah.
I think that's where it's sort of knowing what networking really is for in the professional sense is really helpful. And so I guess with that, there's a couple points on mindset that I think are just really important because networking is one of the most impactful things that will happen or that you'll do. So I guess to that point, first, and I'm certainly not the first person to talk in these terms, but networking is really sort of a parallel activity to and often a fruit of relationship building. And those relationships, as I mentioned, they need to have direction or a purpose. And I think at the end of the day, that's going to translate fundamentally into a desire for love and service, through, with, and or for that other person that you're talking to. So, therefore, I'd say that networking should really be about sort of helping you find those paths for love and service. And so then the questions become, you know, who is this person that I'm talking to? What are they working on? What do they care about? What are they interested in? And if there's alignment on those interests and those desires, then maybe is there a way that the two of us can collaborate on something? And, it moves to that versus what can this person do for me? Or how do I
Mm.
enter the room and become the most or present myself as the most impressive person to get the most impressive job or whatever it may be. So yeah, I think like that genuineness about your skills, your passions, your desires, and what you want to give, how you want to serve, that ends up making the whole experience so much less stressful, and just much more smooth.
I like that. It's interesting, like as you're giving these points, like I'm kind of taking internal stock and just laughing because, for me, I find it very easy to like just join a new group and get to know people. I'm a very outgoing personality, but I know that there are a lot of people out there who do not feel the same way. So I really want to be like an advocate for people who are anxious about entering a new room. But yeah, my mom has said, Mary Kate, you're such a joiner. So I want to be mindful of other people's mindset. And so I'm speaking for them when I ask. Networking can be a scary word for many people. You mentioned the shame element. I think that's a really interesting like piece of it to highlight. Some people flat out hate networking for all the points that you've listed. Like, what am I supposed to do? Become everyone's best friend? Or what am I supposed to get out of this? What encouragement would you offer them? Beyond this, I love this, what you mentioned of getting to know the other person and what they're working on and where you might be able to collaborate. But like, what is like a practical step or mindset that you can offer someone who just really is very anxious or is really hesitant to jump into a networking opportunity?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's definitely different opportunities that are all going to have their different flavors. So I think, one is definitely overcoming perhaps that sense of shame that can be a temptation really, to low self-esteem. And that's difficult, and so overcoming that is certainly an internal battle. But it just might be a matter of, hey, put yourself out there, go to this, and sort of pull yourself up by the bootstraps in a sense. And then of course there's the sense of purpose, which I was mentioning as a mindset, which is, what are we here for, what are we doing? And if that translates into that desire for love and service and finding people who can collaborate on things, um, that also sort of helps set one's mind to be able to be more open to networking. And I think another somewhat practical point too is being open-minded. You have no idea who you're gonna meet when you go to various events, or even when you start a new job, and what you're gonna learn about. Early on in my career, I made the mistake of idolizing the field of international relations. I mean, it's a field my parents were in. It shaped a lot of my childhood, and I really wanted to do it. And I didn't really have the full knowledge or the courage to accept that it really wasn't for me in certain ways, or at least the way I thought it would be. So I kept a pretty close mind to that field, and everything began to feel really sort of transactional. How do I get that next job, and how do I climb these ladders, et cetera, and become impressive, so on and so forth. And then, later on, largely through experience and, networking at Deloitte, where I received just really excellent advice around this sort of thing, I found myself really opening my mind, or having my mind open pretty radically, to, fields and types of work and opportunities I had never considered. I mean, I started off in international relations, thought that was where I was going to go, and then moved into corporate operations and strategy, some tech strategy, and then into nonprofit work, which has felt incredibly startup-y. And where I began to regularly network, build relationships, and explore projects across all sorts of different industries. And so everyone's path is going to look different, but I've known engineers who are now staffers on Capitol Hill, former tech guys who are now in roofing, right? Teachers who have become entrepreneurs, scientists who have become priests. So, you never really know. And so it's really
And would
kind
you
of,
attribute all of those changes to networking? I mean, not totally, but in some part.
yeah, not totally, but absolutely in some part, because you just might not know that an opportunity
Yeah.
exists, right? And
Mhm.
I found myself in this job search, because I wanted to do something that I was genuinely interested in, and this is part of my transition to working in YCP. But I didn't know that I could sort of find this nexus of sort of searching for mission aligned work, in a sense, where I could apply, or have a sort of startup-y feel, because I'd encountered that in some ways in Deloitte that I never would have encountered or thought about if I had sort of stayed fixed on my initial career path. And all of that has come through and about through finding people and getting inspired by people and learning about businesses and opportunities and things people are doing, and then just sort of finding about it that way. So yeah, so much of this does come down to opportunities that just kind of come up somewhat providentially, often through relationships.
I love that. And kudos to you for having the courage to look beyond what you thought was the plan. That really resonates with me. I used to work in a corporate secular marketing job, and very similar to you, was doing very well, but wasn't like super on fire for it. And that's through a series of steps, how I found myself in a nonprofit mission podcast host. Never imagined this, but here we are. So I love hearing your story, and I think it'll resonate with our listeners. And thinking of our listeners, I would love to. You mentioned something about if someone moves to a new city, and you also talked about. I love this idea of different types of networking, professional and personal. If someone has moved to a new city for a new job, what would be your biggest advice for establishing a community, both in and out of the office, so personal and professional?
Yeah, so great question. I mean, I would start with communities and common denominators that already exist. You don't necessarily need to totally come up with something from scratch, and it can start at a super micro level. If it's coworkers roughly your age with whom you really get along, that's an opportunity to, invite them out for a beer and get to know them and potentially have that turn into a friendship. If you're Christian, for example, you can go to your parish or follow your parish or your diocese, on their website, social media, email list, et cetera, and get to know people in those small groups. And if there's an organization like mine, Young Catholic Professionals, where you want to build professional relationships in the city and beyond within the context of common beliefs, purposes, ethics, morals, et cetera, go check it out. And yeah, that is kind of putting yourself out there and going to a thing, right? And then I think with that, there's just, no matter where you go, again, there's going to be a sense of, for a lot of people, maybe not everyone, but there's going to be a sense of, shame and embarrassment. But then there's also the feeling of, well, what if the people aren't welcoming? Well, they might not be perfectly welcoming, right? Or the event itself might actually not be awesome. Um, and and that can sort of lend itself to the anticipation of it not being a great time, or it can sort of tempt you to think like, oh, okay, well, it wasn't worth it. I guess I'm just gonna go home. And in those scenarios, I I think it's important to go to a thing and then go again, give it a second
Hmm.
shot, because you never know. And nobody's perfect. Ideally everyone wants to be a generally welcoming person, but they're going to fall short. And everyone wants their events to be really awesome, and everyone's going to fall short. So I think having having the some courage yourself, but then also mercy and patience with other people, is really impactful. And I've experienced that in DC too, and where the first event I went to for one organization, I didn't love it that much, but what other options did I have, in a sense? And I went back, gave it another shot, and then some of those people have become my best lifelong friends. So yeah, you really never know. So keeping an open mind and being merciful and patient can go such a long way.
Yeah, I love the consistency aspect, because I've also been there, going to various like young adult events or even just like community events. You just never know. Some of them can be clunkers, but that's okay. And you just keep showing up, because yeah, maybe you never know about the next one. So I love that persistency. Um, Something a little more recent, how would you say the rise of hybrid remote work has impacted either your approach to networking or just networking overall?
Yeah, so that's a tough question. I think what I initially noticed was virtual work, and this was like right during the COVID pandemic and lockdown. It made outreach a little bit more intentional, and it made even
Mm,
meetings a little bit more intentional, because there wasn't as much sort of distracted gaggling and whatnot. So it made all the meetings much more time bound and often quite efficient. But it did it did mean that those spontaneous options all of a sudden didn't present themselves the same way. Like you wouldn't just run into someone in the hallway that, you would otherwise. And so, yeah, either way, it is something that I did get used to, and otherwise, kind of in that vein of outreach being a little bit more intentional, since those spontaneous options don't really exist the same way, especially during lockdown. I guess, with that, I just became a little bit less shy when it came to reaching out to people, so long as I was conscious of the fact that they have limited time. And I'm trying to be respectful of their time and their abilities, etc. LinkedIn has also become a really powerful tool, I think. And so with that, I do think that virtual life has really sort of helped us hone practices and tech that can really serve networking powerfully. On the other hand, tech is, it's a tool, it's not our home.
Right.
And so it's not where we're supposed to live. So yeah, email, LinkedIn, social media has helped me professionally a lot, and it's helped me keep in contact with friends, collaborators, even in sort of the post-COVID era. But I still need to spend time with people and meet them face to face. So I think nowadays, especially if I'm going to be meeting someone virtually, which happens pretty much every day, all the time,
We're meeting
I
virtually right now. So
exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
And you know what? We're on video. And that was the point I was about to make. I actually try to meet people on video so like that I can see their face, and engage with them with those visual cues too, which is just so important. But then, otherwise, it is the actual in-person relationships and time spent with other people can't really ever be fully replaced in any way.
right.
So yeah, I think especially once lockdown ended, I, absolutely was going back to events, inviting people to stuff, getting invited to stuff, going and trying to have a good time through those as much as able. So yeah, I think in some ways there's, the silver lining of things in some senses being, quite efficient and, really being creative and using all these various tools and whatnot to network. But, that shouldn't be something that pulls us away from our humanity.
Right. And I feel like this is an excellent time. You've mentioned YCP and how you became involved with them, but can you say a little bit more about specifically what the goal or mission of YCP is?
Yeah, so YCP is all about integrating faith into work. So, obviously we come from a Catholic perspective. So that means faith in God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And, as we're working incarnately in the world, it's working in witness for Christ. So what does that mean? What do we do? So we have 40 chapters across the country, and we do, monthly talks with executives, panels, happy hours, etc. And we have online programming too, a big mentorship network, and more. So it all sort of serves the purpose of inspiring holiness and excellence and connecting people into community, all for the glory of God.
Right. And what I hear is like, because not all of our listeners are necessarily having their spirituality at the forefront. But I think there's a nugget that anyone can really relate to. And something you brought up before is just identifying if there is a group that shares a certain value or certain idea or mission, aligning yourself with a group like that is a really great way to meet people who are just like-minded and, could be a potential people to collaborate with or just good company to keep. And I do have a question about it sounds like YCP is a great, since the P professional so broad. I feel like and let me know if this is true. This is a great opportunity maybe to network with people outside of your quote unquote industry. And have you seen any fruits come of that? Maybe people can meet someone who is outside of their industry, but maybe complements your skill set. Is that something that you see or envision happening potentially at a chapter meeting for YCP?
Yeah, I mean, we see that sort of stuff all the time because I think, we want to do good in the world, and
Mhm.
doing good in the world is a complicated thing, and it's often a multidisciplinary thing. So I think that the easiest, most straightforward example is the way chapters are run, which are run by, young adult volunteers, who all sort of bring different skills to the table to sort of run these chapters. And so we have folks who are, you know, folks who are more involved in event planning, folks who are more involved in marketing and, you know, outreach and so on and so forth, tech, finance, whatever it may be. And so all those skills and, you know, industry backgrounds come together in a way to make something like that happen. Now, that's just the chapters and the way they're run, but otherwise, you know, uh, so that's basically just an example. But yeah, absolutely. At our events, both, you know, what happens and our continued hope is that people do get to meet each other, get to have their minds open, get to explore new ideas, because there's so much opportunity, so many beautiful ideas, so many beautiful projects to work on. They're virtually all going to be multidisciplinary. You know, if you're interested in a biotech startup, right, you need scientists, you need finance people, you need entrepreneurs and business folks. So, you know, those sorts of things come together all the time in little ways here and there. So, and you know, probably big ways too. But yeah, that's absolutely part of the hope.
That's great. And we'll be sure to link to where people can find out more about YCP and maybe find their local chapter in the show notes. So no worries about that. So we're nearing the end of our conversation. But I did want to ask you a question that we always ask our guests. We had a nice chat before we started recording about the title of our podcast, You, Me, and Ennui. And so in that vein, we're always asking our guests, is there anything giving you a sense of ennui right now? And I know you had mentioned that you were thinking of the literal translation from French of boredom, but for us, ennui is, you know, listlessness or doubt or maybe just uneasiness or, you know, a lack of like certainty about the next move. Is there anything giving you a sense of ennui right now that you want to talk about?
That's a great question, and yeah, I admit that my French is not perfect, so I might also be misunderstanding that. But
I'm a Spanish major, so you could tell me anything. So
yeah, I mean, not I'm personally not feeling that at this moment. But it is absolutely something I've experienced and you know relate to. I think those sorts of moments can be extremely transformative, and they've been for me when I've sort of had these moments of like, what is, why am I here? Right, the classic existential crisis.
right.
What am I for? You know, I went to this school, I studied these things, I was supposed to be on this track in my mind. Now I see myself, now I see that not panning out for whatever reason. And why is it that I also don't, you know, love it as much? Like, why am I unhappy? Right. And
Hmm.
so those those experiences can be really, really hard and can come together from multiple angles because it can be professional life, it can be personal life, it can be relationships with people, it can be romantic life. All these things they come together um and yeah, you know, I think it it can in a sense be be a blessing because it points us or it helps us realize that actually we do have a purpose and we do have a direction and there's a reason that we ache for it because we're supposed to have it. And so in those situations, the temptation is to just kind of give up in a sense. But I think that's it's a beautiful moment to sort of rise up and face that challenge and acknowledge that, hey, I need to believe in something and I need to apply myself and I need to find out what that is and what that like desire for love is, which, you know, coming from a Catholic perspective, that's you know, more or less what it's all about. So um so yeah, no, it's absolutely something I can relate to, sympathize with people who are there. I've been there in various states. But yeah, no, it's beautiful to come out on the other side of that tunnel.
Well, thank you for that answer and for those words of encouragement for our listeners. This has been a great conversation. So thank you so much for joining us. So Pascal, like I said, we'll link to the show notes where people can find out about YCP. If there's anything new and upcoming that you want to share, feel free. But yeah, if anything's going on with YCP, feel free to share.
Yeah, well, we got our conference coming up in just a couple weeks. I think we're just wrapping up our sales for the tickets quite soon. So, but either way, that's always a fun opportunity and really neat experience. But yeah, otherwise, that's it. I mean, if you're interested, there's a pretty high likelihood that there's a chapter somewhat close by. So yeah, feel free to check it out.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Pascal. This has been great.
All right, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.